The haze was not the gray of a battleship or a storm front. It was the soft, expensive haze of a humid Florida morning, a milky veil that blurred the line between the Gulf of Mexico and the pristine sands of Naples. The air was thick, warm, and carried the scent of salt and gardenias. In the distance, the iconic Naples Pier stood as a silent sentinel, waiting for the sun to burn through the vapor. This was paradise. It was tranquility. And for Jack Riley, it was a gilded cage. Jack ran with a steady, punishing rhythm, his running shoes whispering on the brick-paved street that traced the shoreline. He was a man carved from disciplined muscle and quiet resolve. His features were sharp, his eyes the color of the Gulf just before a squall. He was a Navy SEAL, a designation that was less a job and more a state of being. Or it had been, until a month ago. A torn hamstring during a training evolution, a stupid, unlucky plant of his foot, had benched him, grounding him on mandatory medical leave. For a man whose life was defined by action, by being the tip of the spear, this enforced stillness was a form of torture. He was a rifle locked in an armory. He was supposed to be with his team, spinning up for their next deployment, not jogging past some of the most exclusive real estate in the country. His physician, a friendly man named Dr. Miller, whose hands had never been calloused by anything rougher than a golf club, had called it an opportunity. "Use the time, Jack," Miller had said with a reassuring smile. "Heal up, decompress, see what the real world feels like." Jack glanced at the mansions lining the street. They were sprawling estates of gleaming white stucco and terracotta roofs, with walls of hurricane-proof glass and lawns so perfect they looked like CGI. This wasn't the real world. This was a manicured, hermetically sealed bubble. It was beautiful, he conceded, but it was hollow. It had no edge. It lacked the one thing that made him feel real: consequence. He pressed on, ignoring the persistent throb in his healing leg. He ran past a modern fortress of concrete and dark-tinted glass, a house designed to intimidate, not to welcome. It was the largest estate on the drive, owned by some tech mogul he'd seen mentioned in the local society pages. The name escaped him. Croft, maybe? He didn't care. To him, they were just silent monuments to a life he couldn't comprehend. The air was quiet, unnaturally so. In the field, quiet was a threat. It was the moment before the ambush. Here, it was just quiet. The only sounds were his own breathing and the gentle shush of the surf. Until he heard it. It wasn't loud. It was sharp, metallic, and out of place. Clang. He slowed, his runner's focus dissolving into acute awareness. He cocked his head, listening. He was an expert in sound, trained to distinguish the click of a safety being disengaged from a snapping twig, the murmur of a voice from 100 yards. Clang. There it was again, metal on stone. It sounded heavy, like a steel pail being dropped. He stopped running altogether, standing motionless on the perfect sidewalk. He looked at the concrete and glass mansion. The sound came from the rear of the property, toward the Gulf. He waited. His heart, which had been pumping hard from exertion, settled into a slower, more deliberate cadence. This wasn't the pulse of a workout. This was the pulse of the hunt. And then came the second sound. It was a whimper, a high-pitched, strangled cry of pain, choked off before it could become a howl. It was the sound of an animal in raw agony. It wasn't a seabird. It wasn't the wind. Silence. One beat. 2. 3. Clang. The metal pail sound. Whimper. The choked cry. The warm air around Jack turned ice cold. He scanned the empty street. No one. The entire neighborhood was asleep, secure in its cocoon of wealth. But inside that house, or behind it, something awful was happening. His mind, wired for pattern recognition, locked onto the sequence. This was not random. Randomness is chaos. This had a rhythm. The clang was an action. The whimper was the response. This was torture. Jack Riley, the man on medical leave, the man trying to decompress, ceased to exist. The operator took his place. He stepped off the sidewalk, his shoes silent on the lush, dew-damp grass of the median. He moved between two massive banyan trees, using their sprawling roots for cover, though there was no one to see him. He assessed the mansion. It was a fortress. The gates were high, the walls were solid. But the sound was coming from the back. Clank, a pause. This time the whimper was cut short, replaced by a dull thud. Jack closed his eyes for a split second. He was not a man prone to rage. Rage was inefficient. What he felt was colder, sharper, and far more lethal, a clear, undeniable sense of purpose. His leave was over. He checked the street one last time. The first sliver of orange was bleeding into the haze, promising another beautiful, sunny Florida day. Jack ignored it. He was no longer looking at the light. He was moving into the shadows. He began to move parallel to the mansion, his footsteps silent, his eyes scanning every wall, every camera, every shadow. The man built for war had just found a new mission on the quietest street in America. Jack's mind worked on two tracks. The first was the civilian, the man on leave, who was sickened and appalled. The second, deeper track, the operator, was already in control. He analyzed the street, the property line, the pre-dawn light. He needed a better position. He needed confirmation. He moved from the street, disappearing into the deep shadows of a service path that ran between the imposing mansion and its equally silent neighbor. The air here was still, smelling of damp stone and night-blooming jasmine. He moved with a fluid economy of motion, his feet finding soft earth, avoiding the crushed shells that would crunch under his weight. The property was enclosed by a high privacy wall, but at the back, a section of modern iron fencing offered a view of the Gulf. It was for the aesthetics, a rich man's window to the sunrise. It was also a tactical flaw. Jack pressed himself into a thicket of hibiscus, the waxy leaves providing perfect concealment. He was 50 yards from the back lanai, and he could see. The lanai was a monument to modern wealth, all white travertine stone and an infinity pool that melted into the hazy gulf beyond. In the middle of this perfection was a thick concrete piling, a feature that seemed jarringly out of place. Chained to it was the source of the whimper. It was a German shepherd, or what was left of one. What Jack saw was a frame of bones draped in fur. The dog was skeletal, its hip bones jutting out like sharp angles. Its coat was matted with filth. It lay on the cold stone, trembling, its head on its paws, the image of utter defeat. A heavy chain ran from its collar to the piling. Beside it lay the source of the first sound, a heavy stainless steel pail, on its side. As Jack watched, a sliding glass door whispered open, casting a warm yellow light onto the lanai. A man stepped out, and Jack's focus narrowed to a single point. Julian Croft was not a big man. He was trim, in his late 40s, with a sharp, handsome face that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. He wore expensive linen loungewear, a white shirt and pants that seemed to glow in the dim light. He held a cup of coffee in one hand and a short, thick dowel, like a piece of a shovel handle, in the other. He was the very picture of civilized, wealthy repose. He walked to the dog, which didn't lift its head but only cringed, its body tightening into a smaller, more desperate shape. "On your feet," Croft said. His voice was not loud. It was calm, clipped, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a man giving an order he expected to be obeyed without question. The dog didn't move, perhaps unable to, perhaps too terrified to try. "I said, on your feet," Croft repeated, his tone unchanged. He nudged the dog with the toe of his expensive leather loafer. The dog let out the faintest whine. Croft sighed, a small puff of irritation, as if dealing with a malfunctioning piece of equipment. He set his coffee cup down on the edge of the pool. He raised the dowel. Jack's entire body went rigid. Every muscle fiber screamed at him to move, to go over the fence, to end this. Croft brought the dowel down, not on the dog's back, but on the stone just inches from its head. The crack was sharp and violent in the morning stillness. The dog yelped, scrambling, its claws scraping as it fought to obey, finally getting its weak, trembling legs under it. "Good," Croft said, his voice still that terrifying, level monotone. "Now, speak." The dog just stood, shaking, its head bowed, tail tucked so far under it was invisible. "Speak," Croft commanded again. He tapped the dowel against his leg. The dog remained silent, paralyzed by fear. "Useless," Croft murmured, almost to himself. He picked up the steel pail. This was the clang. He didn't throw it at the dog. He simply held it, and the dog cringed, anticipating the blow. Croft was training it to fear the sound as much as the impact. He slammed the pail down on the travertine. Clang. The dog flinched violently. Whimper. This was the routine Jack had heard. It was calculated, systematic psychological and physical torture. It was an attempt to break the animal, to shatter its spirit and rebuild it into what? Jack's mind raced, his tactical brain overriding his rage. Assault, breach, neutralize. The thoughts flashed in his head. He could be over that fence in 3 seconds. He could take the dowel from Croft and break him with it before the man's coffee cooled. But his training, the cold logic that kept men like him alive, screamed, no. He knew the rules of engagement. This was Naples, Florida, not some hostile foreign territory. Croft was a citizen on his own property. Jack was a trespasser. If he attacked Croft, Croft would claim self-defense. He would claim Jack was an intruder. He would claim the dog, in its terror, was vicious. Jack played it out in a cold, hard second. He assaults Croft. The police are called. Jack, a Navy SEAL, is arrested for breaking and entering an assault. Julian Croft, the tech billionaire, becomes the victim. And the dog is the evidence. It would be taken by animal services. Croft would insist it was a dangerous, uncontrollable animal he was trying to discipline. It would be put in a kennel, labeled a bite risk, and, lacking an owner to claim it, it would be euthanized. Jack's intervention would be its death sentence. The legal route was just as bleak. Call the police now. They would knock on the front door. Croft would greet them, polite and concerned. He would show them the dangerous dog. He would produce falsified vet records, claim it was a rescue he was rehabilitating. The police, faced with one of the most powerful men in the city, would be forced to take his word. They would leave, perhaps with a polite warning. And the second their cruiser was out of sight, Croft, enraged at the scrutiny, would walk back to that lanai and he would end the dog's life. He would kill the animal that had brought trouble to his perfect, quiet world. The system would fail. Direct action would fail. Both paths led to the same outcome, the dog's death. Jack felt a cold, sharp clarity. He was outside the wire. There would be no backup. The legal and conventional options were not just useless, they were traps. He slowly, carefully slid his phone from his pocket. He kept the phone low, angled up through the hibiscus leaves. He hit record. He didn't need much, just enough. He filmed Croft's calm, cold face. He filmed the cowering, skeletal dog. He filmed Croft lifting the steel pail and slamming it down again. Clang. He filmed the dog's pathetic, hopeless whimper. 30 seconds. He stopped recording. Croft, apparently satisfied with the morning's training, picked up his coffee and walked back inside, the glass door hissing shut, sealing the lanai in silence once more. The dog stood trembling for a full minute before its legs gave out, and it collapsed back onto the cold stone. Jack stayed for another 5 minutes, unmoving, letting his pulse settle. He had the proof, but he knew it wasn't enough for an arrest. Not for a man like Croft. It was not a key that would open a legal door. It was a mission file. It was target confirmation. He backed away as silently as he had arrived. He didn't continue his run. He walked back to his small rented condo, the pre-dawn haze giving way to a brilliant, beautiful, sickeningly cheerful sunrise. He knew what he had to do. The law wouldn't save that dog. He would. Jack's condo was a furnished one-bedroom rental in a nondescript complex miles from the beach. It was functional, anonymous, and clean. A bed, a small kitchen, a laptop. It was a sterile waiting room for a man whose real life was lived elsewhere. Now, it was an operations center. He sat at the small dinette table, his laptop open. On the screen, the 30-second video he had shot played on a silent loop. He was no longer watching it as a horrified witness. He was studying it for intel. He watched Julian Croft's movements, precise, arrogant, unhurried. He mapped the lanai. He noted the security camera in the corner, a standard residential model, its small red indicator light barely visible. He analyzed the shadows. He noted the wall, the iron fence, and the locking mechanism on the gate. He watched the way Croft's linen shirt fluttered in the sea breeze. The wind was coming from the southeast, off the Gulf. Good. It would carry sound away from the house. His rage hadn't cooled. It had solidified. It had transformed from a hot, useless emotion into a cold, hard instrument. In the teams, the first principle was leave no man behind. It was an absolute. It was a creed that superseded politics, borders, and sometimes even the law. You did not leave your brother. You did not leave a man to the mercy of the enemy. Jack looked at the video again. He saw the dog flinch at the clang of the pail. He saw the abject terror, the complete surrender. This was not a pet. This was a prisoner of war, and Croft was the enemy. The law had failed before he even engaged it. The system was a trap designed to protect Croft and condemn his victim. Jack knew with the certainty of a sniper seeing his target in the crosshairs that if he did nothing, that dog would be dead by the end of the week. So, he would not use the system. He would do what he was trained to do. He would conduct a rescue. He knew exactly what he was risking. His career, his pension, his freedom. He was a decorated member of the United States Navy, and he was about to commit a felony, breaking and entering, theft. He looked at the image of the cowering dog. He accepted the risk. He waited until 2:39 a.m., the dead hour, when sleep is deepest, when the world is at its stillest. He was dressed in black, not tactical gear, but simple dark clothing and his running shoes. In a small backpack, he carried only the essentials, a pair of compact bolt cutters, a small pry bar, and a roll of electrical tape. He also packed a heavy, dark green blanket. The drive to the exclusive neighborhood was silent. The sea haze had returned, thicker this time, blanketing the mansions in a shroud. It was perfect cover. He did not approach the front gate. He went back to the service path. The security camera on the corner of the house was amateurish. It was exposed, its wires running down the wall in a conduit. Jack didn't cut it. Cutting wires creates an alert. Instead, he found the small external junction box for the backyard security systems. It was secured by 2 simple screws. His movements were fluid, efficient. He opened the box. He found the wire for the lanai camera feed and the magnetic sensor on the iron gate. He didn't disable them. He used a small piece of looped wire to bypass the gate sensor, tricking the system into thinking the gate was closed, even if it was open. He simply unplugged the lanai camera from its power source in the box. The main system would register a camera fault, not an intrusion. By the time Croft's security company noticed the fault in the morning, Jack and his objective would be long gone. It took him 90 seconds. He moved to the iron fence. The bypass sensor meant the latch was just a simple magnetic lock. He used the small pry bar not for force, but for precision, easing the magnet away from its contact. A soft click. The gate opened. He was in. He moved across the grass, not the stone. The grass absorbed the sound of his steps. The infinity pool was a sheet of black glass reflecting a starless sky, and in the center of the lanai was the dark shape. The dog was asleep, or unconscious. It was hard to tell. It was a heap of matted fur. Jack approached slowly. The sea breeze masked his scent, but as he drew within 10 feet, the dog's head lifted. It didn't bark. It didn't growl. It let out a single, terrified, soundless exhale. A wheeze of pure panic. It flattened itself to the ground, its body trembling so violently it looked like it was vibrating. It was waiting for the clang. It was waiting for the pain. "It's okay," Jack whispered, his voice low, barely a sound. The dog flinched at the sound. Jack stopped. He knelt, making himself smaller. He put the bolt cutters on the stone far from his body. He held his hands out, palms up. He stayed perfectly still. He was a man who could wait. He could wait for days in a hide site for a target. He could wait for this. He let the dog see him. He let the silence stretch. He did not move. He just existed. The dog's trembling eased just slightly. It was confused. The man was not yelling. The pail was not coming. Slowly, inch by inch, Jack moved forward on his knees. The dog watched him, its eyes wide with terror, but it didn't move. It was too weak. He was finally beside it. He could smell the sickness, the filth. He could see the ribs under the matted fur. The chain was thick, bolted to the concrete piling. "This is it, buddy," Jack whispered. "Time to go." He picked up the bolt cutters. The dog saw the metal in his hand and cringed, bracing for a blow. "No," Jack said, his voice firm but gentle. "This one's for you. This one sets you free." He put the jaws of the cutter around a thick link. He squeezed. He was strong, and the tool was good. There was a single, loud metallic snap. The sound echoed in the small space. Jack froze. The dog froze. He looked up at the house. The light stayed off. The silence held. The chain fell away from the dog's collar. It was free, but it didn't move. It didn't understand. Jack put the cutters down. He unzipped his backpack and pulled out the blanket. He shook it open. He laid it on the ground. "Okay," he said softly. "This is the hard part." He reached for the dog. The animal snapped, a weak, pathetic attempt, its teeth clacking in the air with no strength behind the bite. "I know," Jack said. He didn't pull back. He let the dog finish, and then he put his hands firmly on its skeletal body. He felt the bones. It was lighter than his ruck. He lifted the animal. It let out a single low groan of pain, and then, as if all the fight had gone out of it at once, it went limp. He placed the dog in the center of the blanket. He wrapped it gently, covering its head, its body, shielding it from the cold, hiding its shape. He put the cutters and pry bar back in the bag and zipped it up. He picked up the bundle. It weighed almost nothing. He stood up. He walked, not ran, back to the gate. He slipped through, closing it gently behind him. He walked down the path, a man carrying a rolled-up blanket. By the time the first light of morning touched the Florida haze, Jack Riley and the dog were gone. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. But as he felt the faint, weak heartbeat through the wool, he knew that for the first time in a long time, he was on the right side of it. Jack's condo door clicked shut, the sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoing like a gunshot in the small room. The transition from the high-stakes, silent operation to the sterile quiet of his rental was jarring. The adrenaline was now a cold, vibrating hum in his veins, and the bundle in his arms was terrifyingly light. He didn't turn on the main lights. He used the small lamp over the kitchen counter, casting the room in low yellow shadows. He gently placed the bundled blanket on the floor on the only rug he owned. He unwrapped it. The animal that lay there was far worse than it had looked from 50 yards away. Under the matted fur, its body was a road map of abuse. Old scars crisscrossed new bruises. He could count every rib, every knob of its spine. It lay in the blanket, too weak to lift its head, but its eyes, dark, intelligent, and bottomless with terror, followed his every move. It was preparing for the next blow. "I'm not him," Jack said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm not here to hurt you." He slowly shed his black gear, placing the tools back in the bag and hiding it in a closet. He washed his hands, scrubbing them clean as if to remove the filth of Croft's property. He was a SEAL, but he was also a medic. Not a vet, but he knew trauma. He knelt on the floor, moving slowly, keeping his palms visible. "Let's see the damage," he murmured. He started with the basics. No active arterial bleeding. Good. He checked its gums. Pale, almost white, severe dehydration and shock. Its breathing was shallow, a quiet wheeze on every exhale. He ran his hands gently over its body. The dog flinched, a full body tremor, but it was too weak to snap. He felt the unmistakable sharp edges of broken ribs, at least two. The left hind leg felt wrong. An old, badly healed break. This wasn't just abuse. This was a systematic attempt to destroy. He got a shallow bowl and filled it with water. He pushed it slowly toward the dog's nose. The dog ignored it, its eyes locked on Jack's face, unblinking. It was waiting for the trick. "You have to drink," Jack said. He dipped his fingers in the water and let a few drops fall on the dog's lips. The animal flinched, but its tongue darted out, a reflex. He spent 10 minutes doing this, a SEAL operator on his hands and knees, coaxing a broken animal to take a few drops of water. Finally, the dog seemed to understand. It lowered its head with agonizing slowness and began to drink. The sound of it lapping the water was the only sound in the room. It drank the entire bowl. Jack refilled it, and it drank half of the second one before its head sank back to the floor, exhausted by the effort. Jack sat back on his heels. He looked at the animal, at the resilience it must have taken to survive even this long. It was a fighter. "You're a ghost of what you should be," Jack whispered. "A real ghost." He said the name and it felt right. Ghost. That's who you are. But he knew he was out of his depth. Ghost was in shock, possibly bleeding internally, and needed more than water. It was 3:30 a.m. He couldn't go to the 24-hour emergency clinic. They were legally required to scan for a chip. The second they did, they would call the registered owner, Julian Croft. Croft would claim the dog was stolen, Jack would be arrested, and Ghost would be returned to his executioner. It was a perfect trap. He needed someone outside the system. He needed someone he trusted with his life. He picked up his phone and dialed a number not in his main contacts. It rang twice. A rough, tired voice answered. "This better be an emergency, Riley." "It is, Doc. I've got a casualty. A bad one." "Human?" "No," Jack said, looking at Ghost, "but he's one of ours." A pause. "My clinic. Back door. 15 minutes. And if you bring trouble to my door, I'll suture it shut with you inside." The line clicked dead. Jack gently rewrapped Ghost in the blanket. "Okay, boy. We're going to see a friend." Dr. Ben Doc Carter was a man who lived in the gray. He was in his late 50s with a face like a worn leather saddle and the perpetually exhausted eyes of a man who had seen too much. He had been a Navy corpsman, a battlefield medic who had put SEALs back together in the worst places on Earth, and he had patched up Jack's team more than once. When he retired, he'd used his skills to become a veterinarian, running a small 24-hour clinic in a rough part of town, far from the polish of Naples. He specialized in tough cases and deferred payments for people who loved their animals. Jack parked his truck in the alley. The back door was propped open with a brick. The light inside was harsh. "On the table," Doc Carter said, not even looking up from a sink where he was scrubbing his hands. Jack placed Ghost on the steel examining table. Doc turned, wiping his hands on his scrubs, and he froze. His tired eyes went wide, then narrowed into slits of cold, professional fury. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Later. Can you save him?" Doc didn't answer. He was already working. He and Jack moved as a practice team, Doc calling for supplies, Jack anticipating and handing him tools. Doc got an 4-line in, pumping fluids and antibiotics into the dehydrated animal. He was gentle, his large, rough hands surprisingly tender as he examined the broken ribs and felt the old leg injury. This wasn't a dog fight, Doc said, his voice tight with controlled rage. This was systematic. Someone put a lot of time into this. Can you save him? Jack asked again. He's tough. He's a ghost of himself, but he's still here, Doc murmured, unconsciously echoing Jack's own thoughts. He wants to live. That's half the battle. Doc grabbed a scanner. All right, let's see who this monster is. Law says I have to scan. Doc, wait, Jack started, but Doc waved him off. I know. I'm not looking for an owner. I'm looking for an identity. He ran the scanner over Ghost's neck and shoulders. A beep. Nothing. He tried again. Beep. Nothing. That's strange, Doc said, frowning. He put the scanner down and used his fingertips, pressing along the dog's shoulder blades. His fingers stopped. Riley, feel this. Jack put his hand where Doc indicated. Under the skin near the spine was a hard, lumpy mass surrounded by tough scar tissue. An old wound? No, Doc said grimly. He went to a drawer and pulled out a sterile kit. That's a microchip, or what's left of one. It's been compromised. He made a small, precise incision. What he pulled out was not a clean glass chip. It was a shattered, melted piece of plastic and metal. Someone tried to destroy it, Doc whispered, his eyes wide. They took a drill or a soldering iron to it, right through his skin. The room went cold. This was a new level of depravity. This wasn't just abuse. It was a deliberate, brutal act of concealment. Why? Jack asked. Because, Doc said, holding the ruined chip to the light. It's not a standard pet chip. Look at the casing. He scraped off the melted plastic. This is military grade. Jack's blood turned to ice. Doc went to his computer. There might be a fragment of the serial number left. He used a magnifying glass. I can make out the prefix. 00002. That's Department of Defense. He logged into a secure database, one he probably wasn't supposed to have access to anymore. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Searching DOD-K9 database, missing, stolen. The screen flashed. A file popped up. Doc Carter stepped back from the monitor as if he'd been struck. My God, he whispered. What? Jack demanded. Doc turned to him, his face pale. This isn't just a dog, Jack. This is MWD Ghost, serial G214. He's a multi-purpose combatant dog. He was reported missing, presumed stolen, from a transfer kennel at MacDill Air Force Base 3 months ago. He's not Croft's property. He pointed to the skeletal dog now breathing steadily on the table, the fourth line dripping life back into him. He's our property. Julian Croft stood in his pristine, minimalist study, looking not at the gulf, but at the single link of a heavy-gauge steel chain on his glass desk. It was the link Jack's bolt cutters had snapped. It was a crude, ugly, insulting object. It was a violation. He was not a man who tolerated violations. The sun was up now, a brilliant, mocking yellow illuminating the empty concrete piling on his lanai. He had already reviewed the security logs. The lanai camera, the one aimed at the piling, had gone offline at 2:39 a.m. The gate sensor had been bypassed. This was not a random act. This was not some bleeding heart animal rights activist. This was professional. He picked up the link. His face was calm, his breathing even. He felt no panic, only a cold, clarifying anger. It was the anger of an engineer who finds a single line of corrupted code in his perfect program. You don't just fix the code. You find the source of the corruption and you erase it. He knew with absolute certainty that he could not call the police. He had acquired the MWD through an illicit channel, a high-stakes gray market where ex-military hardware and assets were sold to the highest bidder. The dog was a trophy, a symbol of ultimate power, a predator bred for war that he could break and own. He had paid a fortune for the privilege. Calling the police would expose him, his hobby, and his associates. It was unacceptable. He pressed a button on his desk console. Get me Vance. A moment later, a quiet, cultured voice came through the speaker. Mr. Croft. Elias, Croft said, his voice as smooth as the glass desk. There has been a breach at the Naples property. An asset was stolen. The animal. Elias Vance was a man who did not officially exist. On paper, he was the head of risk mitigation for Croft's tech empire. In reality, he was Croft's fixer. He was a man in his 50s, always dressed in an immaculate suit, with pale, watchful eyes and the profound stillness of a reptile. He was not a thug. He was a surgeon, a man who removed problems with precision and silence. "I see," Vance said. "The police." "The police are not to be involved," Croft said, his voice dropping. "This is a private matter. This was not a simple theft. It was targeted. I want the asset retrieved and I want the individual responsible identified. I want to understand who thought they could do this to me." "Understood," Vance replied. "The asset is unique. It cannot be easily hidden. I will start with local veterinary clinics, emergency facilities. I will need access to your private camera feeds. All of them." "You have it," Croft said, and cut the connection. He looked back at the broken link. The hunt had begun. "He's a ghost," Jack said, his voice flat. He was in Doc Carter's small, sterile back room. Ghost was on the table, a second 4-line in, his breathing now stable, his eyes closed. He was, for the first time, in a deep, restorative sleep. "He's not a ghost, Jack," Doc said, tossing a bloody gauze pad into a biohazard bin. "He's a federal case. You're now in possession of stolen high-value government property. This just went from a misdemeanor B&E to a felony that can put you in Leavenworth." Jack ran a hand over his face. He hadn't slept. "I know, but it doesn't change anything. Croft destroyed that chip. He knew what he had. He's not going to call the cops." "No," Doc agreed, his face grim. "He's going to call someone much, much worse." He looked at Jack. "You can't go back to your condo. It's the first place he'll look. You can't use your credit cards. You can't use your phone." Doc went to a locker and pulled out a small prepaid burner phone. He tossed it to Jack. "Cash only, low profile. You need to disappear." He started grabbing supplies, sterile bandages, antibiotics, high-calorie veterinary food, and 2 syringes of pain medication. "This is all I can do, Jack. You get him out of here. You find a hole and you pull it in after you. He needs 3 days of antibiotics minimum. He needs to stay warm. He can't walk for more than a minute at a time." Jack nodded, packing the supplies into his backpack. "Thank you, Doc." "Don't thank me," Doc grunted. "You've just painted a target on both our backs. Now get out and don't call me." Jack gently lifted Ghost, who was still wrapped in the heavy wool blanket. The dog was a dead weight, but a living one. He carried him out the back alley into the gray morning light of a city that had no idea what was happening in its shadows. Jack was now in a pincer. He was a fugitive from the man who had abused Ghost, and he was technically a fugitive from the military he had sworn to serve. He drove for an hour, using every counter-surveillance trick he knew. He took side streets, doubled back, pulled into parking lots and watched his mirrors. He was looking for a tail. He saw nothing, but that almost made it worse. It meant Croft's people were either very good or they hadn't found him yet. He needed a place to hole up. He found it on the edge of the city, a place of urban decay and transient shadows, far from the polished perfection of Naples. The Sandpiper Motel was a relic, its paint peeling, its sign flickering. It was perfect. He parked in the back and went to the front office. The glass was thick, covered in bars. A woman sat behind it watching a small, fuzzy television. She was in her 60s, her face a map of hard lines, her eyes tired but missing nothing. "A week," Jack said, sliding a handful of cash through the slot. The woman looked at the money, then at him. She looked at his clean-cut military bearing. She looked at the cash. She didn't ask for ID. She pushed a key, a real metal key, through the slot. "Room 112, back corner. No visitors, no noise." "Understood," Jack said. He went back to the truck and carried the heavy bundle to the room. The room smelled of old smoke and bleach. He locked the deadbolt, slid the chain, and jammed the room's only chair under the handle. He placed Ghost on the worn, cleanish bedspread. The dog's eyes opened. They were no longer wild with terror. They were watching. He was analyzing Jack with the same quiet intensity Jack was analyzing him. "Well, soldier," Jack whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Welcome to the safe house. It's not much, but he'll never find us here." Jack felt the exhaustion hit him like a physical blow. He was running on fumes. His hamstring injury was aching, and he was now a wanted man, hiding in a cheap motel with a stolen MWD. He looked at Ghost, who had rested his head on his paws, his gaze still fixed on Jack. The dog wasn't cringing. He wasn't trembling. He was just watching and waiting. In his study, Elias Vance was analyzing traffic camera footage. He had found the truck. He had seen it pull out of an alley near Doc Carter's clinic. He smiled, a thin, dry expression. "You're not a ghost," he whispered to the screen. You're just sloppy. The Sandpiper motel room became their world. It was a 10 by 12-foot box that smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial-strength bleach. For 3 days, they lived in a state of suspended animation, a self-imposed lockdown. Jack's training made him a perfect fugitive. He paid for another week in cash, leaving the money in an envelope at the front desk before the manager arrived, avoiding the cameras. He left the room only once a day, just before dawn, to take Ghost to a small, trash-filled patch of weeds behind the building and to retrieve food, cheap cans of tuna and bread for him, boiled chicken and rice from a nearby grocery for the dog. Ghost was a model patient. He was also a mystery. Jack expected, given the abuse, that the dog would be a cowering, nervous wreck or perhaps aggressively fearful. He was neither. He was disciplined. When Jack cleaned his wounds, Ghost trembled, his muscles knotting in anticipation of pain, but he did not snap. He endured the sting of the antiseptic with a stillness that was almost inhuman. When Jack set down food, the dog did not gorge himself. He waited. He would look at the food, then at Jack, his dark eyes asking for a command. "It's okay," Jack said on that first day. "Eat. That's for you." Ghost began to eat, but slowly, with a strange, methodical neatness. But it was the silence that was most profound. The motel was noisy. Trucks geared down on the nearby highway. Doors slammed down the breezeway. People argued in the next room. A normal dog would have been a wreck, barking at every sound. Ghost never made a sound. He would lie on the thin blanket, but he was not resting. He was working. When a car door slammed, his head would lift. His ears would pivot, tracking the sound, analyzing it. His eyes would move to the door, and he would watch the sliver of light under it. He was on watch. He was a silent, living alarm system. On the third day, Jack knew the risk was high, but the dog needed to move. His wounds were healing. The swelling was down. Doc Carter's antibiotics were working. "Okay, boy," Jack whispered. "Short patrol. Just the back alley." He didn't have a leash. He didn't need one. He opened the door a crack, scanned the parking lot. Clear. He moved and Ghost moved with him, a shadow at his heel, his limp pronounced, but his body tense with purpose. They reached the small patch of weeds. The air was cold, damp. As Ghost tended to his needs, a truck on the highway backfired, a sharp crack that sounded just like a rifle shot. Jack didn't even think. He reacted. His body dropped into a low crouch, his head snapping toward the sound. He simultaneously raised his left hand, palm flat, and swept it down toward the ground. The universal, subconscious signal for down. Ghost, who had been stiffly walking, dropped. It was not a normal dog's crouch. It was an instant, flat, military-style down. His body hit the dirt, his head up, his eyes locked onto Jack, awaiting the next command. He didn't flinch. He didn't whine. He obeyed. Jack stared. The truck's engine faded. The world was quiet again. "Up," Jack said, testing. Ghost rose, wincing as his sore ribs pulled, but he got to his feet. Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine, but it was not fear. It was awe. He slowly raised his right hand, fingers closed, thumb out, the signal for heel. Ghost stepped again, wincing with pain, but he moved perfectly, his right shoulder aligning with Jack's left knee. He sat, looking up at Jack's face, his entire being focused into a single point of expectant energy. Jack knelt in the dirt, the cold seeping through his jeans. He looked into the dog's intelligent eyes. "My God," he whispered. "You're not just a dog, you're a soldier." He put his hand on Ghost's head, and this time, the dog didn't flinch. He leaned into the touch, just slightly. A silent acknowledgement. "Yes, I am." That night, the dynamic in the room changed. It was no longer a man and his pet. It was a two-man team in a hideout. Jack felt a new, ferocious level of protectiveness. This wasn't just about saving a victim. It was about protecting a fellow warrior, a brother in arms who had been desecrated by a man who understood the price of nothing. Sleep did not come easily to Jack. His medical leave was for his hamstring, but the real injury was one you couldn't see. He was a man who lived on the edge, and sometimes the edge followed him home. He fell asleep around 3:00 a.m., sinking into the lumpy mattress, and the edge found him. He was back, not in the motel, but in the dust and heat, the smell of diesel and hot metal. He was in a Humvee, the engine screaming. There was shouting. He could hear his shouts, but his voice was distant. The vehicle was tipping. The physics were wrong. The world turned upside down. A slow, terrible roll. He was underwater. No, he was in sand. He couldn't breathe. His chest was crushed. He was looking for his rifle, but he was looking for them, for his team. Ryan, get out. He sat bolt upright, gasping, his heart hammering against his ribs, kicking at the sheets. He was covered in a cold sweat. The tiny room was pitch black. He wasn't in the desert. He was in the motel. He was safe. But his body didn't know it. He couldn't catch his breath. His lungs were seizing. A wet, cold nose pressed against his clenched fist. Jack flinched violently, a guttural "huh?" escaping him. He scrambled for the lamp. Ghost was beside the bed, standing in the dark. He had not barked. He had not growled. He had, upon hearing his handler's distress, immediately moved to engage. "Ghost," Jack breathed, his voice ragged. The dog whined, a low, soft chuff in his chest, a sound of concern. Jack was still gasping, the nightmare's cold grip holding on. Ghost, seeing that his presence was not enough, did something else. He pushed his great head under Jack's trembling hand. It was not a request to be petted. It was a command. "Touch me. I'm real." Jack's fingers curled into the dog's fur. It was warm. It was solid. Ghost pushed again, this time with more purpose. He put his front paws on the bed and laid his head directly on Jack's chest, a heavy, solid, living weight. Jack's heart was still rabbiting. Thump, thump, thump. Under his hand, he felt Ghost's own heartbeat. Slow, steady. Thump, thump, thump. Jack let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He put both hands on the dog, feeling the solid bones, the warmth, the life. He breathed in, matching the dog's rhythm. In, out. The adrenaline receded. The motel room came back into focus. The smell of bleach, the sound of the highway. He was here. He was safe. Ghost kept his head on Jack's chest until the man's heartbeat slowed, until the trembling in his hand stopped. Jack looked down at the warrior who had, in the dead of night, just grounded him, who had pulled him back from the edge without making a sound. "You've been trained for this, haven't you?" Jack whispered. He knew the answer. MWDs were often cross-trained as service animals to help handlers with the very wounds Jack was carrying. He had saved the dog from a physical hell, and the dog had just saved him from a mental one. Jack slid from the bed and sat on the floor, leaning against it, his arm draped over Ghost's back. The dog sat beside him, their shoulders touching, two sentinels in the dark. "I thought I was saving you," Jack said quietly to the darkness. "But we're saving each other, aren't we, boy?" Ghost just leaned his weight against him, a silent, profound, yes. The motel room was a cage. For a week, it had been a sanctuary, but now it was a liability. Jack Riley knew they couldn't hide forever. Elias Vance, Croft's fixer, was a professional. He wouldn't be using local police. He would be using data brokers, private investigators, and a network of informants. He would be checking every clinic, every motel. It was only a matter of time. Jack looked at Ghost. The dog was sleeping at the foot of the bed, no longer a skeletal wreck. The high-calorie food and antibiotics had worked wonders. His wounds were closing, and his matted fur was giving way to a healthy, thick coat. But the biggest change was in his eyes. The terror was gone. When he looked at Jack, there was a profound, focused, intelligent loyalty. He was a soldier reporting for duty. And Jack knew you don't abandon a soldier. Hiding was not a mission. It was a delay. "It's time to finish this, boy," Jack whispered. He was a fugitive. He had broken and entered and he had stolen a high-value military asset. But in doing so, he had uncovered a much larger crime. He was trapped between Croft's illegal network and the Navy's rigid law. He had to choose a side. He picked up the burner phone. He wasn't going to call his command. They were warriors, not lawyers. They would be forced to follow a chain of command that would see him arrested and Ghost impounded. He needed a different player. He needed the police who policed the Navy. He dialed the public number for the NCIS Jacksonville field office. "NCIS, how can I help you?" The voice was bored, procedural. "I need to speak to a duty agent. It concerns the theft of military property." A click, a new voice. This one, sharp, awake, and female. "You've reached the duty agent. Who am I speaking to?" "My name is Jack Riley. I am an active duty operator with Naval Special Warfare. I am in unauthorized possession of MWD G214, Ghost. I have direct evidence concerning his theft and the individual who possessed him." There was a half-second of stunned silence on the line. "You are admitting to being in possession of a stolen military asset?" "Yes," Jack said, "and I have the man who tortured him. I just need you to help me get him." 2 hours later, Jack was sitting in a gray, windowless interview room. He had picked the meeting place, a public library. He had walked in unarmed and surrendered to the two agents waiting for him. The lead agent, Special Agent Kate Navarro, was a woman in her 40s who looked like she had been carved from the same hard granite as the building. She had intelligent, tired eyes that had seen every lie a sailor could tell. Her partner was a younger, silent man who just watched. "Let me be very clear, Petty Officer Riley," Navarro said, lacing her fingers on the table between them. "You are in a world of trouble. You've admitted to breaking and entering, theft, and unauthorized absence. My superiors want to put you in a brig until you're court-martialed." "I know what I did," Jack said, his voice level. "And I'll face that. But that's not why I called you." He laid out the evidence. He slid the burner phone across the table. "The 30-second video I took of Julian Croft torturing him." He slid a folded piece of paper. "The sworn report from Dr. Carter, the veterinarian, detailing the old healed fractures, the starvation, and the drilled-out microchip." Navarro's eyes, which had been hard, flickered with interest. She read the report. When she got to the part about the microchip, her knuckles went white. "Finally," Jack said, "the man who did this is Julian Croft. He's not just an abuser. He's the one who illegally acquired a military asset. He knew exactly what he had." Agent Navarro finished the report. She sat back, her expression unreadable. "You broke the law, Riley." "Yes, I did." "You went outside the chain of command." "Yes, I did." "You did it," she said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips, "to save a soldier's life." She leaned forward. "My superiors are worried about your court-martial. I'm more interested in Julian Croft. He's been on our persons of interest list for a while. Rumors of trafficking and stolen military tech, but he's clean, untouchable." "He's not clean," Jack said. "He's just arrogant." "That's his weakness," Navarro agreed. "He thinks he's above the law, so we're going to use that." She stood up. "You're right, Riley. You didn't just call me about a dog. You just handed me my case. You're no longer a suspect. You're my confidential informant." The plan was simple. It was classic. Arrogance always falls for the same tricks. Jack, using the burner phone, would contact Croft. He wouldn't demand a ransom. He would pose as an opportunistic thief, who, finding the dog's chip was destroyed and Croft's name not on the collar, simply found it. He would complain that the dog was expensive to feed, that it was more trouble than it was worth, and that he wanted a reward for its return. Croft's ego would do the rest. He would be furious that a common thief had his property, and he would want to handle the transaction personally, quietly, and off the books. The location was set, a quiet fishing pier on the outskirts of the city, just at dusk. It was public, but the open spaces gave the NCIS surveillance teams perfect sight lines. Jack stood on the pier. The wood was damp under his boots. The sun was a bleeding orange line on the horizon. At his side, Ghost stood, no longer skeletal. He was strong, alert. His fur was clean. He looked like what he was, a weapon. Jack had him on a simple rope leash. Jack himself was wearing a wire. A dark, expensive sedan pulled up. Julian Croft got out, followed by his fixer, Elias Vance, and two large men who were clearly not risk mitigators. They were bodyguards. "Mr. Riley, I presume," Croft said, walking onto the pier. He looked amused. He didn't look at Jack. He looked at Ghost. My, you've cleaned him up. He almost looks like the animal I paid for." "He was in bad shape," Jack said, his voice flat as per the plan. "He was defective," Croft said, stopping 10 feet away. He motioned to Vance, who was holding a briefcase. "A product that fails to meet specifications. I was disciplining it. It's a shame. All that breeding, all that training, and the wool just wouldn't break. Too much trouble." It was the confession, arrogant, offhand, and recorded by every agent within a 1,000-yard radius. "So," Croft said, "the money for the merchandise. A simple transaction." He nodded to Vance, who opened the case to show stacks of cash. "The dog," Vance said, his reptile eyes on Jack. Croft nodded to his two bodyguards. "Go get my property." The two men, big and lumbering, separated, fanning out to grab the dog. Jack didn't move. He didn't have to. Ghost had been standing at a perfect, relaxed heel. The moment the two men changed their posture, the moment they became threats, he moved. He didn't make a sound. He stepped in front of Jack, his body lowering, his muscles coiling like steel springs. The rope leash went taut. He didn't bark. He didn't snarl. He rumbled. It was a growl that started deep in his chest, a sound of pure, controlled, lethal intent. His lips peeled back, baring his teeth. His eyes, fixed on the two men, were not afraid. They were not angry. They were cold, calculating, and promising pain. The two bodyguards stopped dead. They were tough, but they were not stupid. They had never seen anything like this. Croft's face turned dark red with fury. "Control that. NCIS, you're under arrest." Agent Navarro's voice cut through the twilight. From the shadows, from the parked cars, from the benches, the fishermen and tourists sprang to life. They were a team of 8, armed, armored, and fast. Croft spun around, his face a mask of disbelief. Vance just sighed and put his hands up. The two bodyguards, relieved, did the same. In less than 10 seconds, Croft was in cuffs, his arrogant, screaming protest lost in the wind. Jack stood, his heart pounding. He let out a long breath. Agent Navarro walked over, her face calm. "Good work, sailor." She looked down at Ghost, who was still at a ready stance, his gaze tracking the agents as they secured the scene. "And you, soldier," Navarro said with a rare hint of a smile. "Welcome back to the Navy." Jack reached down and put his hand on Ghost's head. The dog looked up at him, and for the first time, his tail gave a single, slow wag. The mission was over. The room was silent, save for the hum of an air conditioner. It was a formal, sterile conference room at the Naval Air Station, smelling faintly of floor wax and old coffee. The walls were painted a precise government-issued beige, adorned only with a framed flag and the official portrait of the Secretary of the Navy. Jack Riley stood at a perfect position of attention, his hands clasped in front of him. He was not the man from the motel, dressed in shadows and desperation. He was Petty Officer Riley, immaculate in his dress blue uniform, every ribbon and crease in its proper place. At the head of the long, polished table sat 3 officers. In the center was the man who would decide his fate. Commander Thorne was a man who looked like he had been forged from seawater and steel. He was in his late 50s, his gray hair cut sharp and high, his face a road map of command. His chest was a billboard of service, ribbons from conflicts Jack had only read about. Beside him sat Agent Kate Navarro of the NCIS, her file on the table, and a younger lieutenant commander who served as legal counsel. "Petty Officer Riley," Commander Thorne began, his voice a low gravel, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be heard. "I have read the report from NCIS. I have read your after-action report, and I have read the list of charges against you, which include breaking and entering, theft of government property, conduct unbecoming, and a half-dozen violations of the UCMJ." Thorne leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Jack's. "This is the part where you explain to me why you are not on a plane to a federal prison." Jack did not flinch. He did not look away. "Sir, I have no excuse for my actions. I had a visual on a situation. I analyzed the conventional options, and I concluded they would result in the death of the asset. I acted outside the law to protect a soldier's life. I accept the consequences." Thorne's eyes narrowed. He looked at Agent Navarro. "The agent's report," Thorne said, "is glowing. She seems to think you've done her job for her." Navarro spoke, her voice as flat as Thorne's. "Petty Officer Riley's intel, acquired unconventionally," she glanced at Jack, "was the linchpin. We arrested Julian Croft. We arrested his fixer, Elias Vance. The information from Croft's servers, which he was too arrogant to destroy, has exposed an international trafficking ring for stolen military hardware, including arms, tech, and as we now know, MWDs. Croft will be going away for a very, very long time. All of that, Commander, is a direct result of Petty Officer Riley's actions." "So, the results are good," Thorne mused. He looked back at Jack. "The Navy does not condone vigilantism, Riley. We are a force of order, not chaos. You used a sledgehammer when you should have used a telephone." "Sir," Jack said, "a telephone call would have gotten that dog killed. I am certain of it." Thorne was silent for a long, heavy moment. He tapped his pen on the table. "You're a SEAL. Your entire purpose is to operate in the gray, to make the impossible choice. You were given a situation with no good outcomes, and you forged one. It was reckless. It was insubordinate. It was, by any legal definition, a crime." He paused, and the air in the room felt thin. "It was also," Thorne continued, his voice softening by a single, almost imperceptible degree, "the single finest example of upholding the no man left behind creed I have seen in my 30 years of service. You identified a fellow soldier. You saw he was a prisoner of war, and you brought him home." Jack's throat tightened, but he remained at attention. "This is my judgment," Thorne said, his voice hardening again, the moment of grace over. "You are a liability, Riley, but you are a useful one. You are hereby issued a formal written letter of reprimand. You are fined and your pay is docked for 2 months. You are confined to base for 30 days. This incident will be a black mark on your record until the day you retire. It will follow you. You will likely never make Master Chief. He leaned in. Your career as a high flyer is over, but your career is not. You are dismissed. Jack felt his knees almost buckle with the release of tension. Sir, understood, sir. Wait, Thorne said. Jack stopped. There is the matter of the asset, Thorne said, looking at his file. MWDG 214, Ghost. Jack's breath caught. Sir, what is his status? Thorne looked at Navarro. Agent? Navarro picked up the thread. We had the MWD handlers at the base evaluate him. His physical wounds are healing. Dr. Carter did a remarkable job. But the psychological trauma. Croft's training. It was too effective. The dog's will is not broken, but his trust is. He is no longer mission capable. He cannot distinguish between a threat and a handler. He is, for all military purposes, broken. Jack's blood ran cold. Broken, he repeated. He knew what happened to animals and soldiers who were broken. Sir, what does that mean? Thorne watched him. It means he is eligible for retirement. The Navy has procedures for this. MWDs who are honorably discharged due to injury. They are put up for adoption. It is a long, complex process, a lot of paperwork. Jack stood frozen, his heart sinking. However, Thorne said, a slight, dry smile touching his lips for the first time, Agent Navarro's report was very clear on one point. The dog is bonded to one person, aggressively, to the exclusion of all others. He signed a form on his desk with a sharp, decisive stroke. He's been honorably discharged effective today, Thorne said, sliding the form across the table. The U.S. Navy officially has no more use for him. He's just Ghost. And his handler, his last handler, has first priority on adoption. Jack looked at the form. It was Ghost's release. He looked at Thorne, unable to speak. He's your responsibility, Riley, Thorne said, his voice hard again. He always was. Don't mess this up. Sir, Jack finally managed to say, his voice thick. No, sir. I won't. Months later, the Florida haze was gone, burned away by a brilliant, golden-pink sunrise. The air was clear, warm, and smelled of the sea. Jack Riley ran along the surf. He was in running shorts, his hamstring completely healed. He was strong, his pace was steady, and he was not alone. Running beside him, his paws kicking up spray, was Ghost. He was no longer a skeleton. He was a magnificent, powerful animal, his black and tan coat shining with health. He was pure muscle. He ran with a joy that was explosive, his tongue out, his dark eyes bright. He still had a very slight limp in his left hind leg, a permanent reminder of Croft's cruelty, but it didn't slow him down. Okay, boy. Jack shouted, slowing to a walk. Ghost barked, a loud, happy, normal sound that echoed on the beach. He raced in circles around Jack, grabbing a worn-out tennis ball in his mouth. Jack looked at the dog and he looked at the ocean. This was the same beach, the same view he had seen from Croft's property. He remembered the cold, sterile, silent perfection of that mansion. He had thought this was the prison. He had been wrong. This was home. Ghost trotted back, his tail wagging so hard his whole body moved. He dropped the slobbery ball at Jack's feet and looked up, his eyes filled with a simple, profound, and unbreakable devotion. Jack laughed. He picked up the ball. He had been a man defined by the mission, a weapon waiting for a war. He had been a soldier on leave, lost with no purpose. He looked at the powerful, happy dog waiting for the throw. He realized his mission had never ended. It had just changed. All right, one more, Jack said, drawing his arm back. Go long. He threw the ball, and the two of them, two soldiers who had found their peace, ran down the beach together into the morning sun.